administration or military influence or military relationship in such a way that democracy can take its full course and then military serves the purpose for which it is being created?
The way to look at it is this. What are the reasons that induce the military to intervene in the first place? Mostly they cite bad governance, corruption, abuse of public funds, and all kinds of human rights abuses. That's why we are stepping in as a military. That is always the reason they give. The reason they gave, that's the reason they gave in the 1960s and 70s through the 80s, and that's the reason they are giving now. And they're coming back. It sounds like a conspiracy between the elites and the military to perpetrate suffering upon the people. Because the military came in, they said, we are trying to flush out bad government. That's why we are coming in. And they institute their own system. And what happened? They did exactly what the civilian did.
Or even worse.
Or even worse. They don't even respect human rights. Then, through international pressure and people fighting, people dying, say we want democracy, the civilian comes in. Oh, now we are part of you, government for the people. We are one of you. Guess what? They do exactly what the military were doing. So we cannot get a reprieve from our leaders, whether they are the military leaders or the civilian leaders. It is the same thing. Now, what has to be done? It's meant to be seen. I can't sit here and tell you the solution to it right now, but what I can say is our leaders, the civilian leaders, bear the brunt of the responsibility to ensure that when they are in power, they ensure there's transparency. They ensure they serve the people. They are not in government to serve themselves. They are there to serve the people. Government is not a pathway for self-enrichment. Somebody coming to government who probably lives in a rental apartment, he leaves government, he has estates and houses. How is that possible? And this person is not probed. And then look at what happened in Guinea. Abuse of constitutional norm. The president decides to have a referendum, a sham referendum, in order to consolidate his power for a third term. Contravention to the Constitution. So things like this is what caused the world to say in Africa to say, we can't get a breather from this nonsense.
Okay, now knowing the intense nature of military rule and how much control they wield, following the stories and what we have seen, I'm looking at a situation where Sudan is right now. Many of the civil rule supporters are out there on the streets. They are protesting, and you can see professional bodies, also protesting, joining. We've seen doctors say they won't even operate on people because they're controlled by the military and all of that. I want to ask, what options are available for Sudanese people at this moment, knowing fully well that for several years they were under this chain and burden, and the whole world had its attention on Sudan for a long time, and now they are back there again. Could there have been steps to have been taken to avoid this?
You mean steps that would have prevented the military from intervening?
Yes.
I think Sudan, the system was fragile. It wasn't strong enough to prevent a military takeover. Again, the idea of having it shared between civilian and the military was a bad idea. When they agreed, when al-Bashir was taken out, and the interim government was introduced, at that time was when they should have instituted a pure civilian process, where the military is relegated to their barracks. Yeah. So I think the idea of sharing government and rule with the military is a third world idea. It should not have surfaced. The sad thing is the West actually supported it, and that's the painful part of it. Knowing fully whether the Sudanian military are more power hungry than any other military in Africa, any military arm in Africa. Out of most African countries have democratized, but Sudan just remained under military dictatorship for more than 30 years. So things like that, they should have said, okay, no, let's have a civilian process. By 2023, we'll have an elected government. So I was trying to mention that the idea that doctors are not treating people is a bad idea. Doctors have Hippocratic oath to always do good, not to harm a patient. So whether it's under a military regime or a civilian regime, doctors should always, first of all, save life. Not to,
All right, but you would agree with me that the question of who will now remunerate them will come to play.
Hey, I hear what you're saying, but
because they have to get remunerated too.
It's like stuck in the rock and a hard place, but do good at all
times. All right. Okay, but we are in this situation right now. I was going to ask. We've seen the impact in terms of, for example, the U.S. saying it is withdrawing its aid, which is about $700 million coming in. And I'm sure that we'll continue to get more reactions from other governments across the world. What will be the impact of this military coup on Sudan, especially now?
Well, the move from the U.S. Government is a right move. The West should choke the military government as much as possible, assert their soft power. They can do it, like what they are doing now, denying them of aid, denying them of access to harm. And this cannot be just the West. The East has to join hands with China and Russia. We can't have a situation whereby the East is undermining the efforts of the West. So if we have the entire world say, okay, we are not going to allow this, we're not saying don't invade the country. You can choke them, whereby they are not able to operate. Eventually, they will give up power. So I think that's what they will do. The impact of that is average Sudanese are going to suffer the consequence. Unfortunately, that's what happens when two elephants fight. They say the grass is always the So the people are going to suffer the consequence of it. It might be temporarily, short-lived, but I think it's worth it.
All right. Yeah. I like the fact that you say it might be temporary or short-lived, but we do not know yet. Okay, but looking back into the story of Sudan, you realize that Al-Shabaab and other terror groups like the ISWAP and all others, they had a very strong stand in the state prior to this agreement that we have, where we are now having a bit of peace in the country. I want to ask, could this possibly be, this military takeover, could it be any way connected to terror activities or the activities of terrorists in that country? Well,
if the country is going to be prone to terrorism under a civilian rule, it should be the same way under a military rule. I don't think a military takeover will, in and of itself, create room for terrorism to take place, to begin to be a haven for terrorist activities. So I doubt it, because this is the impression and the campaign from the West. They think by military intervention, it means Sudan is going to be a haven for terrorist activity, or other wannabe terrorists who use an opportunity to go into Sudan. I doubt it. The military, it's the military. And like it or hate it, their rule is brutal. Certain things will not be allowed. Like in the time of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, we know there was no terror activities in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was able to hold a tight grip on the country. So I doubt if it will descend into terrorist activity or other terrorist organization going into that country. But I think the consequence far eclipse terrorism, and we should not just narrow our eyes on the aspect that Sudan will be a haven for terrorists. No, there's much more to it than that.
All right. Looking at the specific location of Sudan and its surrounding countries, how is this going to impact, on the neighboring countries now in terms of economic and balance of trade going on in between these countries?
Well, the thing is, we cannot overestimate the impacts or the importance of Sudan. Sudan is strategically located in the Horn of Africa and is surrounded by at least 7 to 9 countries. And even to the, obviously we have to the north, we have Egypt and Libya, we have to the east, we have Chad, Niger and the rest of them, and to the south, Eritrea and Kenya, the rest of them. But the most important area of Sudan is the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a passage to the Suez Canal, where the most Western containers, shipping container, takes that route. If the military, for some reason, is not contained and they block access, we can see a ripple effect all over the West. Remember what happened to the blockade in the Suez Canal a few months back, and prices of goods just went off the roof. You can say, okay, I'm located in Nigeria, I am down south, right? We don't need prices that affect the West will affect those who live in Nigeria and elsewhere. So we cannot afford the Red Sea to be an issue. We can afford the Suez Canal to be blocked. So Sudan is strategically located. The West must ensure that they do something about this military coup that just took place, and try to find a way to ameliorate this situation so it doesn't become a global issue.
Yeah, I'm quite worried, especially because in talking about your solutions that you're preferring, you've been talking about the West and what the West can do, But I'm wondering, it is an African state. And what roles do African countries, neighboring African countries, we have ECOWAS, for example, and what roles do they have to play in all of this?
Very good. I mentioned the West is because where Sudan is located, the West have interest in that area to make sure that the cost of goods are not going off the roof if the Suez Canal was blocked. That was why I mentioned the yes. Of course, the African Union has a huge role. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, the AU has been very hypocritical. There's an imbalance going on in the way the organization of the AU does its thing. Is it the African Union? Right. On the one hand, they will condemn the military, rightly so, but then when there's a bad government in a civilian operated country, they are muted. It's like it's their body who are running these countries. So they don't condemn bad government. They don't condemn corruption. They don't say you must do this, do that, and do something for the people. They don't do that. But when the military comes, they condemn it. It's a double standard. And the AU should be ashamed of itself. They could do more. They should not just make it a club for the African presidents. No. Where they can go there and take pictures and then, no. The purpose of an African Union is to be able to facilitate trade, to make sure life is much better for the average African person. That's the core of their constitution. Now relegate it to discussions about who is next in power, who is power sharing, who is going to take the next position, and all of that stuff negates the purpose of why the organization was set up in the first place. So I think the AU should do more. They can do more. It's a strong organization. But unfortunately, the organizations are leaders of the corrupt nations. So what can you do? So it's an unfortunate situation.
Really unfortunate. Now I'm coming back to it, because you talked about African unions and the roles they should play right now. Do you think that they could have done better in terms of, because now we are trying to have an African-wide trading net where you have the AFCFTA, where all African countries can begin to trade effectively. Would this have in any way? Okay, then we have the African Development Bank, focusing on sets in different nations of Africa, providing aids in terms of finance for developmental projects and all of that. Assuming that Sudan had its fair share